Hey, everybody, it's Mark Pattison. I'm back again with another great episode of Finding Your Summit, all about people overcome adversity and finding their way. And before I get into today's amazing guest and the guy who I've known for a long time, I do want to direct the attention to my website, www.markpattisonnfl.com, and people can see the epic film that the NFL produced called Searching for the Summit. We've also got over 200 podcast of incredible people doing amazing things that you can tap into. Got just tremendous amount of response. Please go to Apple, give the show a ratings and review. It does help with the popularity of the show to help bring inspiration to others just like myself. And finally, we continue to raise money for Amelia's Everest. All proceeds go 100% to Higher Ground. They're located here in Sun Valley, Los Angeles, and New York. And we continue to help out others. And in my case, very important that my daughter, Amelia, is getting healed from epilepsy that she's now had for a long time. And so we're slowly getting to a better result in much regards to the very kind of people that have donated to that cause, including the NFL and the LA, now Las Vegas Raiders. And speaking of the Las Vegas Raiders, I want to bring in my old teammate, Marc Wilson, superstar quarterback. Mark, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no, listen, it's an honor, it's a pleasure, and you know, it's a small world in many respects because we both came out of the city of Seattle. You went to a school called Shorecrest High School. I went to a big school called Roosevelt. Ironically, my dad, at one point in time in his life when he was still alive, did teach at Shorecrest, and so I knew about that. And ultimately, he went on to Shorewood when they opened up that school. But you know, I was going through all the different research and everything else. And obviously, you know, to get any kind of a scholarship coming either to stay within the state of Washington or going outside, you got to be doing something right. And in your case, you know, you've always been tall, you're very athletic, and you can flip and whip the ball. And so you end up getting a scholarship to BYU. And I'm interested to kind of get into that today. Like, what was your motivation behind that desire to go to that particular school? And what other choices did you have in those days?
Well, interestingly enough, you know, Shorecrest is probably 20 minutes or 30 minutes from Roosevelt. I mean, yeah. It's crazy to think that, you know, we grew up pretty much in the same neighborhood, basically.
Right.
But my generation, probably same with you, we played all the sports. We didn't play one sport. So I played basketball, baseball, and football. My going into my senior year, I was being recruited by everybody in the Pac-8 at that time.
Yeah.
And a lot of schools. But my senior season, I broke my jaw in the second game of the year. So I only played, you know, 2 games my senior year, and a lot of the schools dropped out. And I was left with a few big sky schools. USC, Cal was still in there, BYU. University of Washington was going through transition because that was the year Don James came in.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, it's funny, he came in kind of late in the recruiting season. He called me in to meet him down at his office. He had boxes all over his office. And he said, I got to be honest with you, Mark, I don't know who you are, but everyone's telling me I need to recruit you. So you're here, and I hope you come to Washington. But I didn't know Don James. And that year, BYU had led the nation in passing. And they had actually done it for a couple of years. And so I kind of chose to go to BYU because they were really committed to throwing the ball. And I thought that'd be a great place for me to go. And as it turned out, it was a really good place for me to go. It also, as it turned out, Don James was a great coach, and that would have been a great place to go as well. But for me, it was probably the right place, and it turned out really well for me.
Well, I certainly look back at that, which, like, as you were recapping that story, and you're right, it used to be the Pac-8, then went to the Pac-12. They added the Arizona schools, and now it's the Pac-10 and then Pac-12, which it is today, right? And the interesting thing about that is, having been a wide receiver and having gone to the University of Washington and played for Don James, you know, it was certainly a run, then pass. And you went to an all-out air attack. And it was actually pretty unusual for that day. And so, you know, when you go down there, you look at this big major string of quarterbacks, McMahon and Steve Young and Robbie Bosco and Ty Detmer, and, you know, year before, all those guys. Who was before you when you were talking about setting records?
Yeah. So the guy right before me was Gifford Nielsen.
Oh, yeah.
And Gifford Nielsen was an All-American, went to Houston, played for the Oilers about 6 years. He backed up Pastorini during all those kind of great Oiler teams with Earl Campbell that lost to the Steelers in the AFC Championship game every year. And then before Gifford, a guy named Gary Scheide. He was really the one who started it. That's probably not true. A few years even before Gary was a guy named Virgil Carter, who you might remember that name, played with the Chicago Bears during the Gale Sayers era. But in any event, I followed a guy named Gifford Nielsen. Gifford was an All-American. Then I was an All-American. Jim McMahon followed me, was an All-American. Steve Young followed him. He was an All-American. Robbie followed Steve. He was an All-American. Then Ty came along, won the Heisman Trophy. So but you know how it goes when you have that kind of a reputation, kids want to come. And so the recruiting, they were starting to recruit some great players and a lot of great quarterbacks wanted to come and be part of that offense.
No, I know one of the things, well, if you're in football, you know this. I don't think if you're not as familiar with football, you would know this. But with a lot of Mormons going to BYU, there was always this thing where they go off on the mission for 2 years, maybe they're freshman, sophomore. So they come back and they're physically, mentally, like everything to become a better football player in that position. You're just at a higher level and ready to play. Did you go on a mission? Were you part of that?
No, I did not. I did not go. You know what's funny about that, Mark, is that prior to, it was really Lavelle Edwards. Lavelle Edwards, when he became the head coach, and I'm not sure exactly the year that was, maybe 1972. I got there in 1975. But when Lavelle came, Lavelle was an offensive lineman guy. He coached high school here in Utah, but he was an offensive lineman. When he came to BYU, he realized that there was no way BYU could ever compete really with the kind of the nationally prominent schools because we couldn't recruit the big enough linemen and running backs to compete playing that kind of football. And so he came to the conclusion the only way we could win was to outscore teams, and the only way we're going to do that is throw the ball. But in that era, no one really knew how to throw it. There weren't really very many people that knew how to teach it. And so it was interesting. Lavelle kind of cobbled together this staff, and it worked, it clicked. But Lavelle was really the guy that kind of got it going. But before Lavelle, BYU could never win. And the reason I'm telling you this is the excuse was, or not the excuse, the reason why BYU could never win was because their guys went on missions. And when they came back, they really didn't feel like playing. They hadn't played for 2 years. They were out of shape, and they could never get back really into that kind of shape. And so that was what everyone said was the reason why we could never win. Then when we started winning, that was the reason why we were winning, because guys they came back a little more mature physically, mentally, emotionally. So it's kind of funny how it's kind of taken a turn depending upon how well the team's kind of doing at that particular time. You know what I mean?
So I want to stay on Lavelle Edwards, who was another classic coach back in the day. He was there forever. He was one of those coaches that really understood what he had, and it wasn't necessarily looking to advance his career in the sense of going to maybe a more prestigious football university, a USC or Alabama, that we have today. But what did he teach you about life beyond just football?
Lavelle was a really interesting guy. He was so unselfish. He understood that he did not understand the passing game. And so he went out and found the best offensive coordinators he could find to come in and teach it. He did the same thing on the defense. So, we've talked about the quarterbacks, but when you look at the offensive coordinators that have come through here with me and Jim and Steve, it's a who's who. I mean, my guy was a guy named Doug Scoville, who was the guy who was with Roger Staubach when he won the Heisman Trophy at Navy. The guy that was with Jim was Doug Scoville, and then Mike Holmgren. Mike Holmgren was with Steve Young. I mean, it just goes on. And Ted Toller was here for a while. I mean, it just goes on and on. And that's because Lavelle was just so unselfish and wasn't threatened. So Lavelle would turn the offense over to those guys, let them have kind of free reign, and Lavelle created that environment for that to happen. But some of the life lessons, at BYU, one of the interesting things here is that there's this culture of getting married early. And so on my senior year, we had 20-some guys that were married on that team, which was totally unusual. When we went to the bowl game, we would get off the plane and people would have their wives with them, and everybody would look at us like we were crazy. Who are these Mormon guys? What's going on? But that was a big part of Lavelle too. He had a great marriage with Patty, and they took these young married couples under their wing. And for them, it was about family and how important it was to treat your spouse with respect. And he started young, right? When we were young, he started on that theme. And for him, that's what it was about, because he saw the bigger picture. You know, he saw a much bigger picture around us and our lives than just this football experience at BYU for a few years. And I'll always be so appreciative of that.
That's incredible. And I know you've been married for a long time. Were you part of that same group of people getting married early?
Yeah, Colleen and I got married when we were 20. And we've now been married for 44 years, and It's been amazing.
Yeah, now that is amazing. I want to ask you about Jim McMahon, because he did come after you. Actually, before I ask you about Jim McMahon, I want to ask you about your junior year, because you went off, I think it was 28 or 29 touchdowns, and you end up number 3 in the Heisman voting, which was incredible. What happened your junior year? Because you had a great sophomore year, 26 or something like that, touchdowns that were thrown, and then you go from 26 to 8. So did you get hurt during that year?
Yeah, so in about the third or fourth game, I pulled my hamstring bad, and Jim came in and played, and Jim played great. So my sophomore year, I was the Western Athletic Conference Player of the Year, honorable mention All-American, some of those things you mentioned. Jim finished the year, and Jim was then the Western Athletic Conference Player of the Year, had a great season. So, and it took a long time for my hamstring to heal, but more than anything, Jim was playing so well, they really didn't want to make a change. And I really couldn't blame them. And then my senior year, they redshirted Jim. And so I went back and I played, and I had a really good year again. And that was kind of a strategy, again, that BYU always did. Gifford Nielsen redshirted, I redshirted, Jim McMahon redshirted, and Steve Young was supposed to redshirt, except that the quarterback they had slotted to follow Jim didn't pan out. And so they moved the schedule up and Steve started. But that was what they tried to do here at BYU, was to redshirt all the quarterbacks, so they had that extra year in the system.
That's I redshirted too, so I understand that. So you end up reloading, not rebuilding so much of the program that you're doing. It's really interesting to me that you have a guy. I mean, I don't know how often this has happened where a quarterback goes off like that, like Jim McMahon did, is the player of the year for the conference, and then he redshirts the next year just because you're coming back, who actually won it the year before. That's a really interesting dynamic. So then let's go back to Jim McMahon. What was that relationship like? Because he got pretty wacky, in all the things he was doing. I don't mean that in a derogatory, by any means, but, with the Bears, became such a character, right? All the different defiant things that he would do and act out or say. Was he that way at BYU, or is that a personality that kind of developed over time?
No, I think that's Jim's kind of innate personality. I mean, Jim is really a fun guy to be around. And that's just kind of his personality. Jim is obviously a great player, but Jim's a great teammate. And people have asked this question a lot. When I played, I felt Jim supported me as well as anybody possibly could. When he played, I tried to support him. I think we had a really good relationship. And like I said, Jim, great player, a great part of BYU's history, and obviously had a great pro career in Chicago in particular.
One of my great disappointments in life is that I never won the Heisman Trophy. I actually, for everybody that's listening, that's a joke, because I was never even in the running. But for you, that was, you're only 2 spots away, right? You ended up number 3. Did you go back to New York? Did you go through the whole ceremony?
No, we didn't do it in those days. We didn't really do that. So I remember sitting in the athletic director's office, and we were kind of waiting for the announcement and kind of waiting on pins and needles to see what was going to happen. I really didn't think that I was going to win, but to come in third was a great honor.
It's a great honor. Okay, so now let's move on and let's get into the NFL. You drafted in the first round. Just absolutely amazing to be in the first round, of course. So that would probably be 1979, roughly, right?
It was the 1980 draft.
1980, which is a great year to be drafted by the Raiders, because they end up going to the Super Bowl and beating the Eagles in the final game. What was that like for you? Because I remember, from my experience with the Raiders, it was just so different from my experience with Don James, very hard nosed. I mean, even stretching where you lined up by position and by depth chart, and everybody was exactly 5 yards apart. And now you're just, it was kind of loosey goosey, and the whole Al Davis thing and all these personalities were there. And I believe, if my memory serves me right, in that year in 1980, I believe is the year that they may have, that the Raiders may have come from a wild card and gone all the way. Yeah. So, I mean, what was your experience like when you first got there, and now you've gone from this BYU culture to the crazy Raiders?
Yeah, it was crazy. And I was, a little nervous about it. And then to add to that, I actually sat out of training camp for a couple of weeks. So when I showed up at training camp, everybody had been there for a few weeks, and now I'm showing up. So that just kind of added to the anxiety. But, in reality, it really, and people wouldn't understand this unless they've been there, like you've been there. It was the most welcoming, inclusive team probably I've ever been on. And it was made up, as you said, of all kinds of crazy characters, crazy in a good way.
Yeah.
You talk about a diverse group of guys in terms of personalities and lifestyles. And yet the philosophy of that team was they didn't care. What they cared about is what you did when you stepped on the field. And if you stepped on the field and played and practiced hard and studied hard and were prepared for the game and then played the game hard, you could pretty much be whoever you wanted to be, and they would be supportive of that. That was a great thing for me because I was on the other end kind of the spectrum. But it really worked well for that team at that time. And I think it's worked well and served that organization well over the years. So that was kind of my experience when I first got there.
Yeah, a guy that we had chatted back and forth last night about that I had great respect for was Todd Christensen. Todd, I don't know if he ever became an all, I know he's all pro, but in the Hall of Fame. I'm not sure if he made it that far, but just a phenomenal tight end. He moved, as you mentioned last night, from fullback to tight end. Could catch anything, could get open, one of the hardest working guys ever. And even though he was very different from me and my personality, he was so respectful of what I was trying to do, just bury my way. I mean, I was a seventh rounder, you were a first rounder. So then there's a big gap in trying to make the team when you sit in those two different positions. And he couldn't have been any more supportive of just rooting me on, amongst all that competition.
And Todd would have understood that. He was a third-round pick by the Dallas Cowboys as a running back. It didn't really work out. He got released. He got picked up, I think, by the Philadelphia Eagles. He was only there for a few weeks. Then he got picked up by the Giants. That didn't work out. The Raiders picked him up off the waiver wires, and they only picked him up because they needed a punt snapper. So he was the punt snapper, and he played on all the special teams. And they said to him, basically, listen, we need to move you to tight end. We have no plans for you to play fullback. And Todd was always resistant of that because I think the Giants wanted to move him to tight end too, but he wouldn't move. And by the time he'd been through three teams, he kind of decided maybe I better kind of do what they asked me to do. Yeah. So he moved to tight end. And what caught their eye, it's kind of funny because, in the NFL, you really only practice what you're doing one day a week. So the offense has an offensive day, the defense has a defensive day. And then you kind of end up playing in the game. So you really only have one day. And so the non-starters on offense, they become the guys who run the plays against the starting defense for the opponent during that week. And where Todd really caught their attention was he took it really serious. So in the conference, the Raiders was the San Diego Chargers under Eric Coryell, and they had a tight end named Kellen Winslow. And when we would play the Chargers, Todd knew he was essentially playing Kellen Winslow, and he would go crazy. He would catch a million balls. No one could cover him. And everybody was looking at him like, whoa, maybe we got something here that we didn't really quite know we had. And eventually he worked his way in the lineup and had a great career.
Speaking of great careers, you go on, you experienced 2 Super Bowl rings, one against the Eagles, one against the Washington Redskins. I know that you were a starter a lot of that time, and then just being the NFL, and it was way more violent and not nearly as generous to the protection of the quarterback as is today. I can't even imagine the kind of numbers you throw up today, but I think I read you still ended up like number 6 all time in terms of Raider passers. Now, since I read that, maybe it's changed a little bit, but to be anywhere up on that list is just, it's an honor. It's a great thing that you accomplished. And, I know you did battle some injuries when you were there, but it's just, again, the durability of any quarterback back in those days was just tenuous, right? Because the rules were so different and people would fight and punch and, do everything else. And so there wasn't as nearly as much protection, for your position as there is today.
Yeah, it was a different game. There's no question about it. The rules were different. Although I have to tell you that, if I could go back and have one rule change, it wouldn't be the protection. It would be the ball. Because in our day, when we played in the NFL, they would bring out and take the ball out of the box. And now you'd start the game. That's what you started with, those balls. And I hated those balls. If you've ever taken a brand new basketball out of the box and went in the backyard to shoot it, I mean, it's slippery. It's kind of got that film on it. That's how footballs are too. Yeah. And that's how they started in every NFL game. And I hated those balls. And I always prayed that we'd lose the coin flip so the other guy would have to throw it first, instead of me. And now, of course, they let them bring their own balls. They can use them for a week or two. So they're all getting to use balls that are kind of ready to go. They're not brand new. That's the rule change I wish I had if I could go back.
Well, and certainly that plays into Inflategate or whatever that Tom Brady was involved in because of using his own ball, right? So, no, I totally get that. One of the reasons why I want to have you on this podcast, so let me just, let's put a bow on your NFL career. So you play, 11 years or so, and the last couple are with the Patriots, but once a Raider, always a Raider. We love that. I didn't have near the career that you did, but, I feel so inclusive with what the Raiders are able to do in terms of bringing the alumni around. I know you've been to a couple of events. I've been to a couple of events. And what is rung out to be true for me is everybody treats me the same as if I played 20 years, if I played 5 years, it doesn't matter. So that's the cool bond that we do share. As mentioned, one of the things that really struck me when I originally started talking to you a couple of weeks ago after 20 years, 30 years, last time we saw each other, was this whole thing about life after football. And for some, it's been a real struggle. And I think what makes it even more impressive is today they have a lot of great programs through the NFL, PA, the Trust, mentors and classes on how to be a broadcaster, a real estate developer, or in coaching. You just go down the list, and there's a lot of these different professions that they can offer help to. Back in our day, they had nothing. You went off the cliff. When you were done, you were flipping done. And for a lot of people, myself included, it was trying to transition that energy from football that you knew exactly what to do. You've been doing it for so long when you count really college. In my case, I was at the UW for 5 years and the NFL for 5 years. So, 10 years of your life is a long time, a decade. Just you woke up and you lived and you breathed football. And all of a sudden that is gone. You don't get 22 guys down the street, let's go crack heads today. And so, did you, as you were coming towards the end of your career, did you start to formulate life after football, what you were going to do, move maybe back to Seattle? I mean, they went from Oakland, where you started, down to Los Angeles, and now you're winding up your career. Did you have a plan, or did you have to kind of fall on your face to get up and figure out what you're going to do?
No, I started thinking about it probably 3 years before I retired from the NFL. And I started making plans. I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do. I knew I wanted to be kind of in the financial arena some way, somehow. And so I started making plans, as I said, probably 3 years before I retired, and started doing some things in the off season to kind of get ready. I could kind of see what was happening and where I was headed. So I started thinking about it a few years before I retired.
So you get into the real estate development business, and for people that don't know, really north, and correct me if I'm wrong, north is where you settle, Woodinville, up in that area, which has become a hotbed of not just homes and development, but also just bigger business. The big winery, many wineries are up in that area, and boutique places. But if there was ever being kind of in the right place at the right time and kind of seeing and forecasting where the growth of Seattle was going, you certainly hit it.
Yeah, it was great timing. And then the other thing that helped for me, as you mentioned, there weren't programs to help guys transition. And even in the real estate development world, there was really nowhere to go learn it. Today you can go to college, you can take classes, you can get a master's degree in real estate development, but not when I came out of the NFL, which was in 1990. And so I was very fortunate. We didn't make the money that the guys make today, but I had made pretty good money, and I was able to kind of live off that money for a couple of years to figure out what I was going to do. And I had some capital that I could invest in different things. And so, but for me, the real turning point was I met a gentleman that was willing to kind of show me the ropes and take me under his wing and kind of teach me. And that was critical. Without that, I would not have done what I did. And he was so generous in that regard. We became partners, and we were partners for probably about 12 years, 14 years in what turned out to be a 25-year real estate development career. But that was the key for me. I kind of knew what I wanted to do, didn't know how to get there. And I happened to meet the right guy. We clicked, and he taught me.
So now you're in this career for 25 years. For whatever reasons, you decide, I'm checking out. I don't want to do this anymore. Now you're golfing. And this opportunity comes for you to get involved as either you're the founder and CEO of a company called Q Sciences. And so tell me what kind of got you off the sidelines and back into the game of life, and more about what you do today to propel this health and wellness company in a positive direction.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what it was about me, or maybe us football guys. I kind of always dreamed about retiring to the golf course, and kind of what we talked about, guys talked about, and I thought, that'd be a great thing. And so I started preparing to do that. I joined a great course club up there in Washington, Sahali Country Club, and was playing there. And it wasn't that I was tired of real estate development. It kind of run its course. I just finished up kind of a 3 or 4, 5 projects. I got them wound up. And so it was either I'm going to commit and go back in and do this next round of projects. And then a project's going to take 3 or 4 years to fully mature. So it's not it takes a commitment if you're going to stay in it and kind of work the next round of projects. And so I decided it was time for me to kind of step back, kind of wound things down, and was playing golf every day thinking that's what I wanted to do. And truthfully, it lasted about 6 months because I was bored out of my mind. And I was driving everybody around me crazy. My wife in the morning would say, "What, you're going to go play golf today, right?" Because she didn't want me home with her all day. She said, "Listen, Mark, I know how to manage the household. I'm fine. I don't need you here looking over my shoulder. So go play golf. And by the way, come home around dinner time." Yeah. So I'm hanging out at Sahali Country Club all day, and it's a beautiful place to hang out. Yeah. Trust me. And I had great friends that I played with. But one day I'm driving home, probably after 6 months, I stop at a stoplight on the way back to Woodinville, and literally the voice in my head said, "Are you really going to do this every day for the rest of your life? Are you crazy? You can't do this every day for the rest of your life." And I knew in that instant, sometimes we have those experiences. I knew in that instance I was right. There was no way I could do this for the rest of my life. I was in my early 50s. I had a lot of life to live. And so I started thinking about what I might do. So I wasn't tempted to kind of give up on that and just go back and play golf. I sold the membership and then really started spending some time in terms of what I wanted to do. And I'd learned, in 25, 30 years outside the NFL that you start with the why. You don't start with the what or the how, if that makes any sense. Yeah. And so for me, it was, why do I want to jump back in, and what do I want to do and why? And for me, it was really pretty simple. When I got up in the morning, this was the criteria. When I got up in the morning, I wanted it to matter. And when I went to bed at night, I wanted to feel like in some way, no matter how small a way, that I had done something during the day that maybe benefited somebody or somebody's family. And that was the criteria. That was the why. And so then it was, okay, well, how do we do that? Or what do we do to fulfill that why? And, one thing led to another. I started asking people around me, what have you seen in your life's experience that makes a difference for people or families? And I'd get all kinds of answers, but I could kind of put them in one of 3 categories. If you can do something to benefit someone's health, improve someone's health, that makes a difference. If you can do something to help their kids or advance their kids, makes a difference for that family. If you can do something around their financial circumstances to help, makes a difference. And I kind of gravitated towards the health and wellness thing. And again, I was very fortunate to meet a doctor down in Eugene, Oregon, a big Oregon Duck fan. Mm-hmm. And he had some really interesting ideas on how we could make a difference around nutritional supplementation. And I believed him. And we hooked up and we started this company, and we're finishing our 9th year. And it's kind of been an interesting run, but that's kind of how I got into this thing called Q Sciences.
So along with that, you go from living in the great state of Washington to setting up really your base of operations, kind of back where it all started for you in football, back in the great state of Utah, just outside of Salt Lake City. And now you guys are just, rolling, and it sounds like you have momentum with a lot of great products and employees and all those other things that help really drive. I think maybe I heard this wrong when you might have dropped this a couple months or so ago, that you might even be existing in 23 different countries. Does that sound like a right number?
Yeah, we're shipping product to 23 countries right now. And I honestly believe in 5 years, give me 5 or 7 years, we'll be in 50, 60 countries, but we're in 23 today.
And what's your exit strategy on, so at some point in time, you may be at the crossroads again, was saying, hey, Salt Lake's got some nice golf courses and maybe I want to ski or something. Obviously that's seasonal, but where do you see that train going? Or maybe you don't. Maybe like in my case, I can tell you that I will never retire. So that just doesn't appeal to me because I know I'll be right back at that same spot that you were talking about, which you're looking at your window saying, okay, what am I going to do today? And I do belong to a golf course. It doesn't happen to be here in Sun Valley, Idaho, where I live, but nonetheless, I do belong to one that I rarely go to, right? Because it's in the great state of Washington. But even if I was up there and I wasn't working, like I think I would be like you. That's not enough to sustain like your why, your purpose on what you're going to do next.
Yeah, it's so true. So well said. So for me, I'm never going to retire either. I've been there, done that. It doesn't really suit me. So I don't see myself retiring either. And, we have a lot of options here. I probably could have made the decision to take this company public 100 times already. And that's just going to increase as we continue to expand and grow. So that's an option. Although I do have some of my I've got 2 sons that are involved in this business with me now. My oldest is an attorney and he does our legal work, and my youngest has an MBA and a finance kind of specialty. So he works in our finance group. I really think that we'll probably stay private, but at some point I'll bow out or I'll move up and be the chairman of the board. I won't be in the daily operations, and these younger guys will run it. And I'm kind of anxious to see how they do, to see how they'll do in that role.
I love that. And, I've been, I'm so incredibly grateful to come down and spend some time with you in February. I'm going to speak to some of your people that are going to come to your conference, and that's going to be just a eye-opening, fantastic experience. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of energy and momentum, when we get to that site, that location that you're going to have. And so I personally cannot wait. I thank you so much. And, I'm so happy for you, the way life turns out. Before we went live today, we're talking about this tragic story with a current Raider, actually just got cut last night, going 156 miles per hour, impaired at 3:56 in the morning. And, ended the life of another gal. And both he, this football player and his girlfriend were hurt in fiery crash. And, it's just bad. And those are just tragic stories. And it's so uplifting. And that's what this podcast is about, is trying to bring some inspiration and some levity by showing other people's struggles that they've now turned into success, or they just had to make that hard right. You had a fantastic career, NFL career. It's amazing. And you were able to take a right-hand turn, and now you're sitting and put yourself in not just one career, which is the real estate, but a second career, which is helping others with your health and wellness. And just, what a great spot to be in. So it's a tribute to you on your life and in a lot of the choices that you've made.
Well, thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. And we are as excited to have you come. So I've let people know that you're coming, and everyone is so jacked to have you come and listen to your story. So we can't wait to get to February either.
Awesome. What is the website for Q Sciences? I want to make sure that everybody knows where they can find these really cool products.
Well, if they go to just shop.qsciences.com, they can get to our products and see what we have. Okay.
It's a nice, big, fancy Q, which I love, that's on there. So listen, it's been a joy. It's been an honor to have a former Raider great and teammate on the pod, and nothing but best of luck to you in the future, your company, your health, your wellness, your family, everything else that goes with that.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
All right, everybody. There he is, the one, the only Marc Wilson. Thank you. Hey, and thank you so much for listening to the Find Your Summit podcast. We are so glad to have you along for this journey. And if you enjoy the show, please tell a friend, share it on iTunes, spread it to the planet. We're looking to broadcast this to every person that is out there because, as you know, everybody has their own summit that they're going after. Okay, if you're looking to follow my journey, you can find that through my social links on markpattisonnfl.com. That's Mark, M-A-R-K, Pattison, P-A-T-T-I-S-O-N, NFL.com. So, until the next podcast, just remember, clear eyes, full hearts, and remember, it takes a little more to make a champion, so make it happen. Thank you. Bye.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.